All right, guys, I'm having you all in mind. If you can have the bracha in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Torah b'fi b'chabet Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzenu v'tze'etzeim b'chabet Yisrael. Kulanu yodea shemecha v'lomdei Toratech lishma. Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah l'mo Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'achar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so Arthur, I want to wish you long life on your dad's Yortzeit.
Thank you, mate.
I want to just share the screen on Zoom. Just hang on one sec. Guys, if anybody knew Arthur back in the day when he had hair, his dad really looked like him. You didn't know Arthur when he was in his 20s, but he really looks like you, Arthur.
Yeah, when I was younger, yeah.
He's got that north.
I remember,
Yeah.
Wow.
Talk to us about your dad a bit, because
well, in that photo you can see my dad over there on the left. I mean, on the right. There's my mom on their wedding day, and that lady in there is actually my grandmother on my mom's side.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So those are the three people there. Okay, so basically about my dad, he was always the sort of person that he always gave advice, but he always said to you, "This is what I would do." But, it's up to you. He never used to judge you. You could go to him for anything. He always had a sense of humor there. It was very strange. I mean, I remember walking around with him in the garden, holding his hand, even at the age of 27. And if we used to go to fetes, I used to hold his hand. We just had this close bond as father. And whenever I used to see him, the first thing I would do was go into the house, give him a hug and kiss, and tell him I love him. And when I left, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
No, he was an amazing guy. He was a dentist, and he's the only guy who could work on my teeth without me being scared.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Look, it was a hard time. I mean, I rushed through actually, he passed away on a Saturday morning. I got a call that my dad wasn't well. I shot through, and by the time I got to Winter, he really passed away. That kind of revive. This was in 1999. He's been gone 21 years already, yeah.
So he died young, eh?
Yeah, he died at 60.
Shame. Sorry, wish you a long life, though.
Yeah, so it's been a long time, but I still think of him all the time. We all do when our parents go. It's one of those things.
Doesn't change.
No, it doesn't get easier, but you do learn to cope with life.
It's very true.
Shame. I remember, Arthur, when you lost your mom a few years later, and you were still in your late 20s, you felt like an orphan with both your parents. I remember that.
I was an orphan.
I know. And I'm saying no matter how old you are, and you weren't so old.
Yeah, I know. I was, it was 2002 when Mom passed away. So that's like almost 17 years ago.
Yeah, it was a long time. So listen, we're going to be learning in your dad's to elevate his neshama, and what we're going to do is we're going to quickly repeat the Mishnah, because Mishnah and the word neshama have got the same letters, so it'll be an elevation. We're not going to repeat the whole shiur. We're just going to quickly read the Mishnah for a minute. And guys, let's get started, and have in mind that this is a good aliyah. All right. So let me just read it. It's a 9b1. The Mishnah describes the circumstances under which one is liable for damage done by his property. Whatever I'm obligated to guard from doing damage, I've caused the damage. It does. If I fail to guard it properly, therefore I'm liable for that damage. If I caused a portion of his damage, I'm obligated in the payment of his damage like one who caused all his damage. One is obligated to pay for damage only in the case of properties that are not subject to the law of Me'ilah. Properties that belong to members of the covenant and privately held properties. And in these circumstances, one is liable for damage done in any place except in the premises that is reserved exclusively for the damager, and on premises belonging to both the damaged party and the damager. When one of the damagers does damage, the damager is obligated to make payment for the damage with the choicest of land. Okay, so that's the Mishnah for your dad today. And let's go into the case immediately and see with what case are we dealing with here. Okay, so how we ended off yesterday, just as a summary on 9b2, is we were talking about the case that when you choose a custodian, or you are the custodian and you fail to look after that which is in your care properly. We went before with Rav Chista and Rav Oshaya with the 4 custodians, the borrower, the renter, the unpaid custodian, the paid custodian. Now we're saying, what if you choose a second party as a custodian? When are you responsible? When you're dealing with a case of a general category of mental incompetence, of which you could have a deaf-mute person with retardation, a person that is insane or suffers from schizophrenia, etc., or a minor. Why a minor? Is that a minor generally gets up to mischief, and they're not responsible. They're not halachically considered an adult where they can measure the consequence of their actions. Right. So let's just discuss the case quickly. The Gemara cites a brisa that elaborates the opening rule of the Mishnah. The rabbis taught in a brisa, whatever I'm obligated to guard from doing damage, I've caused the damage it does if I fail to guard it properly. And it's not talking about a case where obviously, which is clear, that if you fail to guard it properly, you're responsible. That's obvious. Teaching the more novel case. So if one owned an ox or a pit, which he handed over to the care of a mental incompetent, such as a deaf, mute, an insane person or a minor, and the ox or pit damaged another person or his property, the owner of the damager is liable to pay for the damage because he was remiss in his responsibility to guard the damager. Okay? So what do we mean? The owner has not fulfilled his responsibility to guard his property from doing damage because he delegated that duty to somebody that didn't have the mental capacity or could not weigh up consequence correctly. So what we're saying is, why is this a more novel case? Because yes, he did find the custodian, but that custodian could not be trusted to look after that particular man's property, and he did so insufficiently. So therefore, it's not choosing with discernment the sort of person that's going to be the custodian. So, all right, here's our case. If you owned an ox or a pit and you handed it over to a deaf mute or an insane person or minor, you basically liable for the damages it causes. That's obvious. Why? Because somebody that has mental limitations is not able to look after an ox or is not able to ensure that a pit is safe. But the Gemara cites an unusual case where it says, why are you not responsible if you hand over a fire to somebody that's mentally incompetent? Rather, if one hands over his fire to the care of one who is mentally incompetent and a blaze results, the owner of the fire is not liable to pay for the damage. Okay, so what we want to do is seek the rationale for the brass's distinction. Because if you're charging a mental incompetent with the care of one's ox or one's pit, the owner is liable. And charging the mental incompetent with the care of one's fire, in which case the owner is not liable. Guys, do you have any questions before we go on?
No,
so we're saying it doesn't. Sorry, Kev?
Seems a bit absurd.
It does.
Fire causes damage. I mean,
correct. So we're saying why exactly that? We're saying why should a fire be different to an ox or pit? They're all damages. So the Bryson says, well, what is the case we're dealing with? Firstly, you've got to know some of the facts. We're dealing with a fettered ox in a covered pit. So the term fettered means tied up. So that ox has been tied up where it cannot escape. Like in the old days, you had a Western where you tie up the horse and go into the saloon. So the ox was fettered and the pit was covered. So obviously nobody could fall into it. It had, think of it like a manhole covering a sewerage pit. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's covered. But if you look at the case of a fire, it wants to propose that you've given over a mere coal. Then the Bryce's distinction is difficult. So the first opinion is that maybe we're not dealing with an open fire. We're dealing with a coal. So a coal has the capacity to create a fire, but at that stage, it's merely a coal. Now, you've got to think of it in terms of before electricity, is that fire was the main way of cooking and heating. There was no ESCOM. Actually, with ESCOM, there is no ESCOM. So we might go back to coals. But anyway, that's a separate issue. So here we're talking about a case of that the mental incompetent person was handed a mere coal. So we're saying, but it still doesn't make sense, because if you're comparing a mere coal who's not in a state to do damage, the same with a fettered ox in a covered pit. How are you responsible for the case of a covered pit and a fettered ox and not with a mere coal? Or alternatively, why are you responsible with the coal when the coal is also in a state of not being ready to damage? Does that make sense? So, if you have a look, why are we saying a coal? Because it won't erupt into a flame unless it's fanned. So that's why they say it's analogous to a fettered ox or covered pit, because it's in a contained state when it's entrusted to somebody that's mentally incapacitated. So you've already done the protection. You just say, listen, let me know if there's any problem here. Just shout out to me. I'm just going in for a business meeting. Okay. So then it says, fine. Then it says, maybe you want to say something different, that the bride deals with a different case, that you've got an unfettered ox. It's not tied up in an uncovered pit. And maybe this is analogous to a situation where you handled somebody that's mentally incompetent to ready flame. So why would you say there that the person isn't responsible if it's a ready flame, but basically you're responsible if the ox is untied or an uncovered pit? So it's easy to understand if the ox is untied or it's an uncovered pit why you're responsible, because a mental incompetent person can't be expected to have the skill set to be able to cover the pit or tie up the ox. You get what I'm saying? So that you understand why you're responsible. But we still don't understand why we're responsible for a ready flame. So we're going to bring a case with Rav Lakish, explaining in the name of Rav Chistia. Okay? Just give me 1 second. I just want to get the exact Gemara's turn. All right. So guys, this initially was a discussion that was brought on the 59th Mishnah in section B. Okay, so we could just going to unpack it. Sorry, guys, I had to go from page to page. Apologies. Right. All right, so Rav Lakish reported in the name of Rav Chizkiah, the Mishnah taught its ruling that one who hands the fire to a deaf mute is not liable under the laws of man, only when he handed him a mere coal and the mental incompetent fanned it into a flame. But if he handed him a ready flame, he, the owner, is liable to pay even under the laws of man. So let me just unpack it, because when Rav Lakish is mentioning this mission in the name of Rav Chizkiah, it's actually mentioning it the other way around, because language was more complicated then. So what we're saying is here is that if he handed him a coal, he's not responsible. If he handed him a flame, he is responsible. Now, it's discerning between two different types of responsibility. The first type of responsibility is bidei shemaim, at the hands of heaven. Okay, so what do we mean here? We mean that sometimes we learn of a case where you can't prosecute on earth with the based in because of failed evidence, but Hashem knows a person's intention, okay? And Hashem will hold that person responsible, even if they get away with it in this world. So Gavin and I have learned over the years many cases in Sanhedrin. There's a concept, Gavin, do you remember, of groma? Do you remember what groma is? Yeah. Groma means indirect murder. Yeah. So if you hire a hitman, then the hitman is given the death penalty, because they could say to the hitman, you knew that there was a prohibition against murder, and yet for money you took on the case to assassinate this person. Therefore, you get the death penalty. But the person as indirect law can maybe do, even in normal law, an extended jail sentence. But even in American law or British law, they'll be given a life sentence, but they're not going to be given the death penalty, even in states in the US that ask for the death penalty, because it's technically an indirect act. That can be seen to be an accomplice of homicide, but not actually the one that pulled the trigger. But Hashem will hold that person responsible as a catalyst for putting all those series of events into motion. So we're talking about a case here where the Beis Din might not be able to convict in all of these cases because there's a barrier between you, the incompetent, and the damage that was caused. And in some cases, they can prosecute. So when it talks about 59b, it talks about a person where they ask the mentally incompetent person to set something ablaze on his behalf. And this was brought in Kedushin 42b. So then, in that particular case, the Gemara doesn't see a difference between you giving it to somebody that's a second party to create purposeful arson, whereas you're giving it to somebody that had no right having a ready flame, because they're obviously going to cause damage because they're not competent to weigh up consequence. Either way, B'dei Shemayim, you're responsible, and in many cases in the legal system. So what is Rav Chizkiah saying? What is Rav Lakish saying that Rav Chizkiah's Mishnah taught? So it was saying clearly, if it's a mere kol, you're still responsible in the hands of heaven. Why? Because you should know better. What do you think somebody that's mentally incompetent is going to do when they've got a lot of time on their hands? They're probably going to mess around with it and fan it into a flame, blow in a toy with it, and at the very least burn their little finger with it. Does that make sense? But the court, it's difficult for them to convict you because you'd say it wasn't a ready damager. But the Rav Chizkiah agrees that if it's a ready flame, you're absolutely responsible because it doesn't have the capacity naturally to dim out. Okay. So the reason that the owner is liable in the latter case is that the damage is ready. Okay. So therefore, the Gemara concludes, actually the Brisa refers to where the owner handed over to a mentally incompetent person a fettered ox in a covered pit, whose analogous situation is regard to a fire to where he handed him a mere coal. And okay, now we're going on 9b3, and which you said above in objection to the situation. What's the difference between this case and that case? So if you want to say, okay, the ox is tied up and the pit's covered, and the coal's not ready to damage, why would you be responsible for the coal? And why would you be responsible then for a tied up ox in the pit? And the reason that Rav Lakish gives and Rav Chizkiyahu is very, very clear, is that when you tie up an ox and you've got an animal that's pulling on the restraints all the time, what do you think is going to happen, guys?
It's going to break.
It's going to either, exactly, Marco, it's either going to break or it's going to loosen. It's going to loosen. And therefore, if you take the mental competent person out of the issue entirely, and you just tied up your ox, and you went for an extended period of time, it might, with its sheer force, break through the wood beam that you tied it to, or snap through the actual leash or restraint, or unloosen it by fiddling with it to the point where the knot unloosens. So there, it's in the case where the natural default position is that given a period of time, it is going to damage. Therefore, you're responsible. If you take a look at a covering of a manhole, it gets dislodged with vibrations, whether it's cars or horses, etc. The longer period that's there, it was a snug fit, and then with the vibrations, it moves up and down, and eventually it's going to move to a position where it's going to be able to, if you stand on the one end, tipple you over. Does that make sense? It's not going to be an exact match. And bear in mind, today when they create a manhole, one of the reasons they create a round manhole and not a square is because with the square, if you put it at an angle, it actually can fall through with the circumference and diameter, whereas a circle, no matter which way you turn the lid, it doesn't fall in. I don't know if you know that. I mean, they asked that on an employment question, obviously, just to do logic. But what happens is when they're manufactured properly, it's a snug fit. In those days, they didn't have mass manufacturing. And even today, you've got all the vibrations where it's going to. So it is prone to damage given time. Same with the fetid ox. But a coal, what happens the more you leave it alone?
Eventually burns out.
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
It does. It grows progressively dimmer. That's exactly it. It burns out, it dies. So therefore, if you give it to a mental incompetent, it will naturally die, whereas if you have a fetid ox and a covered pit, it's naturally a given time going to cause damage and either get loose of its restraints or the manhole is going to dislodge from the vibrations. So that over a period of time will damage, whereas the coal will die out after a period of time. So therefore, you're not responsible, and you're only responsible with the coal. It's the second party, it's the mentally incompetent person that fans it into a flame, and therefore directly he causes the damage by his actions. So better Shemaim, you're responsible at the hands of heaven. Why? Because you were an idiot to give the coal to somebody that's mentally incompetent. If you've ever known somebody that has learning disabilities, I don't mean in terms of mild disabilities, but severe retardation, they find amusing things in things that we find mundane. Just give them a little bit of time, and I promise you, after a short period of time, they'll find a way to create some sort of a damage. I don't know if anybody agrees. You leave them
100%.
Yeah.
I got a son.
Yeah, well, Arthur's son suffers from a certain condition, and it's very, very difficult for you because he gets bored very easily, and then with that short period of time, it's difficult. Even if you give him toys, etc., or over a certain period of time, he breaks them naturally. Because
the miracle of YouTube that keeps him entertained. But other than that, he basically gets entertained with a stick, a ball, and a piece of string. Still, he loves it. That's his 3 things in his life.
The stick, a ball, and
a piece of string. And he can play for hours.
And he's 16.
Yeah.
So it's very, very, very difficult. So believe me, in the hands of heaven, you're responsible. What are you doing giving him a call? But there's a difference between that and prosecution. Now, Rav Yochanan goes one step further. So he says that you're not even responsible if you give a ready flame to somebody that's mentally incompetent. And we think, how's this possible? So there it talks about a different situation. It's an unfettered ox, meaning the ox is not tied up and the pit is not covered up, because in that case, you are surely responsible. But they say, why aren't you responsible then if you give a ready flame, which is the same as an uncovered pit and an untied up ox? Why aren't you responsible there if you give it to somebody that's mentally incompetent? And the reason being is that the mentally incompetent person is what you call the step away. He's the one that actually has to cause the damage by taking the grasp of the flame on a stick and setting things alight. So it's actually the deaf mute that legally causes the damage. But the unfettered ox and the uncovered pit are going to do damage whether you have somebody there looking after the animals or not, because they're not tied up, and in that case the pit isn't covered, so that's going to do damage anyway. Here you've given it to a second party, even though it's already flame, but that second party has caused the flame. Obviously not everybody agrees with Rav Yochanan, and it is a dissenting opinion, but obviously it does have logic to it. And just one thing that we wanted to go, we've got 15 minutes left, is that at the end of the day, I'm actually battling with this a little bit, to be honest. And the reason I'm battling this is, Arthur, would you get your son to take care of anything honestly that could be relatively
not a chance.
Not a chance. I love your son. He's my godson. And I can tell you, even a stick I wouldn't let him run with. Maybe a balloon you find in string.
Now, look, he's got better over the years, but, if you look at a 16-year-old and look at him as a 16-year-old, it's different levels. It's years apart.
Exactly. And I just think you and Nadine are amazing parents, because it's not easy what you deal with at all. And I just think you guys are really, really amazing. And I'm sure your dad would be proud of you, honestly.
Thanks, man.
Really.
Yeah, Scott.
So we're just going to finish on 9b2, then we've done the 9 stuff. Okay, so now we're talking about a separate. So we finished that. Pursuant to its mention of a distinction between ox in a pit and a fire, the Gemara cites a lengthy Brisa discussion which discusses the leniencies versus the stringencies and compares these damages to each other. So what's it going to compare? It's going to compare an ox to a pit, an ox to a fire, a pit to a fire to an ox. And there's some cases where an ox is more stringent, some more lenient. So here, in some aspects, ox is more stringent than pit, and in some aspects, pit is more stringent than ox. So the Bryce elaborates, ox is more stringent than pit. In what case? So if an ox kills a person, you pay the kofar payment. Now remember, we did a kofar payment in 4A3. I'm just going to go through it, what it means. It's in note 21. If a moed kills a person, the owner must pay kofar, which literally means the word atonement, to the victim's heir. So this is derived from Shmot chapter 21, verse 28 to verse 30, which states, and if an ox shall gore a man or a woman and the person dies, but an atonement payment shall be assessed against him, and he shall pay his redemption for his life, whatever shall be assessed against him. Payment of kofar exempts the owner from punishment of death at the hands of heaven, to which he would otherwise be liable for not having guarded his ox. Again, this is in the case when the ox is moored. It's created many, many damages before, and the owner now has been absolutely grossly negligent. So apart from paying for damage, he should be responsible for ending that person's life prematurely. So even though the earth can't convict him because it's his property, heaven heaven says that this is certainly not acceptable, and that he should know the gravity of his situation. Okay? So obviously, if a pit kills somebody, you don't have to pay the kofar payment. If an ox kills somebody, you do. If your ox, it's more, it kills a person, a slave, a Canaanite slave, you have to pay 30 shekels. This is not the case if your pit kills a Canaanite slave. Now, the ox verdict is that it's sentenced to death for having killed a person. If that was finalized, the ox is lo hanoah. The ox is forbidden for benefit. The word hanoah means benefit. You can't use the ox for any sort of benefit. But if you had a pit, a sewerage pit, and a person died in that, you could still use that sewerage pit for sewerage. Does that make sense? So you can derive benefit even after it's killed somebody. Even more than that, you're not responsible for the death of a person that falls in a pit, because this is a stationary damage where the person didn't look clearly. And it says if your ox will fall in a pit, meaning that it comes to exempt a person that falls in a pit. Obviously, you have to pay for damages, etc., but there's no kofar payment, and you're not responsible for the person's death, because a person should watch where they're going in according to a stationary position, whereas an ox goes forward to damage. Okay, so in that way, an ox is more stringent. So pit is more stringent than ox because it's prone to damage from inception. Remember, an ox is normal. You can take it to a public place. It's only once it creates damage that it suddenly went rogue. Remember, a pit is more stringent because it's moored from an outset. An ox is not. If you look at a Keren ox, it has to damage 3 times before the 4th time it becomes moored, whereas a pit is moored from the outset. So these are the stringencies that are not true of ox. Does anybody have any questions? Guys?
No.
Okay, how long do we have left?
5 minutes.
All right. So, guys, we technically finished on the 9th daf. We did well. We don't have to take any further time. Are there no questions in the daf in any manner, shape, or form?
No, I understand.
No, I just want to ask you,
Sure.
It's not a material question. Just what is a minor? Is it below 20 or is it below 13?
It's below 13.
Okay.
It's below 13. So Gavin's asking a good question. I just want to explain to you where his question's coming from. Is that if somebody is responsible for their actions after they hit puberty, in terms of they're obligated to mitzvahs, there's a certain mental capacity of consequence that you only have an awareness when you hit, Gavin, I don't know if it's the age of 20 or 21. I need to check on it exactly, but I think it's around about there. And I'm not sure exactly, where you have full comprehension of consequence. Does that make sense? Because a 13-year-old boy, although is capable of having children and therefore obligated in terms of mitzvahs, and people in those days got married a lot earlier. full consequence and capacity for wisdom of consequence does occur later, but it doesn't mean halachically you're not responsible for transgressing. It just means that there's certain levels that are higher. And in terms of the halachic difference, I'm not sure. I can try and find out. But I do know from the age of 13, you're not considered a minor. And with a woman from 12 and a half. Does that make sense? When she hits puberty, because you've got a Nara and a Nara Marasa and a married woman. So there's a distinction between a man and a woman. Okay.
I heard somewhere it was 13 years and 3 months or something. There's a bit of time afterwards, a little bit of time.
Yeah, so this is a case with Ben Soira or Moira, where it's not exactly 13 years, it's 13 years and something. I don't remember offhand. I need to basically go and have a look at it. Gavin, do you remember offhand with Ben Soira or Moira?
No. I just know that I'm 99% sure on the 20-year-old story. On the 13, I'm not 100% sure on the extra months. I'm not sure.
Okay, but I think Michael's right. I think it's actually 3 years and 3 months. I think that does make sense. But in terms of halachically responsible, if a boy of 14 rapes a married woman who has sexual relations with her, he's chayiv for the death penalty. He's absolutely chayiv. He doesn't have to wait till he's 20 at all. In terms of responsibility differences of reward and mitzvahs and what it means at 20, I think it just means that your level of comprehension is at a different level. So there's a stringency that Shemaim will hold you at more. If you're older, you're more mature. But halachically, I don't think there's any distinction. And guys, I just wanted to wish you a good Shabbos, eh?
Yeah, good Shabbos, and long life to you, Arthur, and your family.
Thanks, Gav.
Yeah, really.
Thanks, Gav. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Damon.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers, guys.
All right. Good Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbos.
Thanks, Damon.